I don't know that I've ever come across a fault that needs more than 5 names. Or 5 names,
For
5 words.
sure.
Jim, Frank,
Yeah.
Todd.
Pat, knees out.
Did you get it?
Welcome to Behind the Knowledge, a best hour podcast where we dive deep into the lives and stories of inspiring coaches from all walks of life. The 2 hosts of this show are me, Pat Barber, and my good friend and fellow coach, Todd Occhiuto. Each week, we'll sit down with the most amazing coaches we can find, uncovering their unique paths, the challenges they've faced, and passions that continue to drive them. Whether you're a seasoned coach, an aspiring one, or simply somebody who likes listening to stories of how people achieve the success that they have, this podcast is for you. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired by the powerful stories and insights from the world of coaching. This is Behind the Knowledge. Let's jump in.
We are back. Another episode, Behind the Knowledge. And this is a special episode because we are talking specifically about the 6 criteria of effective coaching, teaching, seeing, correcting, group management, presence
There's
and
a TH
attitude,
in the
and
middle.
demonstration. And we are honored to have Brentnie Kincaid here with us, CrossFit Level 4 trainer, seminar staff member. What's it been now, 12 years?
On seminar staff? No.
17 years.
Affiliate owner, CrossFit Mafia, one of the coolest gyms, the best piece of art in any CrossFit gym in the world.
That's
On the way in.
Yeah, he's saying that because he did it.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why. That's the joke that's in there.
Oh, is
It's
that a
behind
joke?
The scene. Yeah,
I don't know
it's
that
like-
that's a joke, but it's a thing.
Her gym actually is really cool. It's all a black and white theme, and she has one pop of color on one big wall. If you ever get a chance to see it, that pop of color was done by Todd. First mural he ever did. They showed it to me yesterday. Todd sucks at most things. This
That
was
one was
really
cool.
cool. This
was
was really
good.
cool.
It was
Yeah.
good. Anyways, what we're here to talk about, seeing and correcting, which is ironic because yesterday we did a class example and intentionally you did your best to not see and correct.
I did do my best to not see
Wow.
incorrect.
How hard was that?
Yeah.
So, just to set the scene for everybody listening, we were doing a feedback example, so how to give feedback. And she was the coach to demo the class. And in order for us to give feedback on her, we kind of needed her to screw things up intentionally.
Yep.
Part of that was, you can always find something to give feedback on,
Yep.
but part of that was we wanted everyone watching to be able to deliver feedback on her. So we needed to make it something that was quite clear and stood out. So you intentionally took the first chunk of class to not see incorrect. So
Yeah, I did not see. The 2 main things that I did not do that would be on their evaluation form that they needed to fill out on for my class was that I did not state the stimulus of the workout. So nobody knew how long that thing was going to take.
Yep.
And then I also did not do any seeing and correcting in the general warm-up. I taught and I demoed, and then I walked around and said, good, great, that looks nice.
Which is interesting because we see that happen a lot, right?
All the
Which
time.
was kind of why we planted that there to give that example. But with that being said, I want to know what goes through your mind as far as when you start coaching a class, where's your head at as far as seeing and correcting goes? When do you start? What are you looking for? What kind of process? And I know a lot of this stuff probably just inherently happens at this point with the amount of experience that you have doing this and the quality at which you coach. But if you could, come up with some objective tasks or a checklist, what's your thought process? You go into class. When do you start? And what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think that the process really starts from the very beginning, as soon as people start to walk through the door. And it's funny because when we were walking around the Disney Springs yesterday, talking to each other, we were all talking about how we like to people watch. And I think that that's inherent in what we do as our job is to people watch. We just start to see that and we recognize body language and movement patterns and things like that. And so in the very beginning, when I am at my affiliate and people start to walk through the doors, you start to observe and assess and be like, okay, that's not the normal walk of that person, or there's a little hitch in their step, or maybe they're a little, whatever you're just evaluating and looking at their movement. So that's the first thing is as soon as you start to see them, you start to just recognize movement and what's going on, and also body language. That's another part of the coaching stuff is to what's going on with maybe demeanor or how they're carrying themselves, and that can tell you a lot, right? That's more of the presence and attitude component, but it does play into maybe how you might address somebody first off out the gate, right?
Yeah.
And then the next phase goes into the general warm-up when they really start moving through ranges of motion. And it's still the same thing. We're teaching stuff, but also starting to continue to catalog assessment and catalog what's going on. Okay, they walked in here, they had a little hitch in their step, they're starting to get warm, that thing is starting to go away, maybe they're just sore, they're not injured or whatever. And so that process is how it starts.
I love two things that you said there. Number one, every movement a person makes is an opportunity to evaluate how they're moving.
Yeah.
Like there's so much that can be told. It's like, I know we're teaching squats and deadlifts and presses and stuff like that, but you can watch somebody walk into your gym and be like, oh, their toes are turned out when they walk and I see their knee do this. I know what their squat's going to look like. I can see that beforehand. So taking every opportunity to see people move and actually deliberately watch that. And the other thing that you said was that you categorize things, and meaning you're starting to memorize what's going on. And it's like, hey, I remember that Pat walked in like this. I saw his foot do that and his knee do that. I now have that in the back of my mind that when he goes to squat, the first thing I'm probably going to look at is what's his knee doing relative to his foot based on what he showed me just walking in here. And I think so many coaches, especially newer coaches, before they have that ability to start cataloging things, everything is a unique interaction. It's like I watched his knee cave in and his foot turn out when he walked, but then there's no relationship between when they squat. And if you're not able to connect those dots, you're just missing a ton of opportunity there.
Yeah.
So just to categorize everything for everyone, seeing and correcting is one of the 6 criteria, right? Seeing and correcting is something that, if you asked me, is the core of everything that we do. Beyond, like, all of the other stuff is around to support the goal of seeing and correcting to me. Until you're doing that seeing and correcting, you're not coaching. And the fact that you guys brought it out with, like, the very first thing of just, like, paying attention to them, that's huge. Like, I think that stuff, like, and what I'm thinking about as you guys talk about seeing and correcting as people walk in the door is, what's interesting is you guys, when that happens, you don't say stuff to people necessarily. You don't be like, I mean,
turn your toe forward and push your knee out when you're walking.
Totally. So you don't immediately be like, I see your toe is turning out right now. Like, you don't narrate that process. Right. It's all internal. And then that allows you to categorize stuff for then later come movement time, to where you will be not just telling them what they're doing wrong, but like actually starting to go into correcting. We'll go into correcting in a sec, but it's fun because, like, I wonder if that's a common trait amongst coaches, is that desire to, not the desire, but the common tendency to people watch and to look a little closer, because that's 100%. Like we were all talking about it yesterday. It's a very much a natural thing to just like be looking at.
It's so interesting, right? Yeah. And I remember that, like, when I first started coaching and starting learning the points of performance and really looking at movement with this, because I'd been working out and doing a lot of these movements, but not looking at it through that same lens. I didn't really know I kind of knew how to do them based on I'd watch somebody else do it or whatever and be like, I think this is how I should squat. But when I had it defined for me how to squat, then I became obsessed of just people watching and watching how people interacted with the environment around them.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other layer into that is part of what is in the level 2, where we start to talk about common movement themes, and then how we kind of give our best examples of where does this thing show up all over the place. And the more you can draw those relationships together, and where does posterior chain, or where does midline, or like all of that stuff, and how does it express itself out there in the world, then you start to really pick up on, like, you know, somebody that is at the mall or somebody that's on an airplane, and you're like, whoa, okay, got it. And it just shows you how that stuff like shows up in life, in real world, and you start to see it everywhere, which is really fun.
Yeah, you see it in life and everywhere. And then also, to your point, you make mention of in the general warm-up, you're watching people, you're starting to catalog things. This is where you're probably seeing and correcting. And a lot of times we see coaches that don't really do any seeing and correcting in the general warm-up, because a lot of times the movements in the general warm-up aren't specifically linked to what we're teaching in the workout or in the specific warm-up. Sure. But if you're not connecting the dots of what's going on there, and you're missing opportunities, right? It's like I see people do pass-throughs, PVC pass-throughs as a general warm-up thing. It's like, if you're having an athlete do a PVC pass-through, where are your eyes going? What are you looking for, and what fault do you expect to show up that's probably going to show up when they start overhead squatting or snatching or whatever they're going to do that day? Like, what do you look at in something like a PVC pass-through?
In a pass-through, you're looking at like the how they're holding onto the thing, the PVC pipe, what the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulders do, and do they do things together at the same time? And then the other is down chain and what's going on with the midline. Because if they can't move, what they'll do is they'll steal that range of motion and put it into their core. Their back will bend as opposed to the shoulders bending. And so it's all the things. It's like this assessment from out to in or in to out or whatever you're looking for, and that just tells you what's going on.
And that's so cool. It's like, cool, I had Pat do 10 PVC pass-throughs. I saw that his ribs were sticking out and his back was overarched. I know as soon as he goes overhead for his overhead squat, because I've cataloged that, I'm going to look first at his midsection more than likely and expect that thing to be out of place.
Yep.
An interesting thing, like she just rattled that off with where your eyes are going. I think you would probably be less deliberate with where your eyes are going, and you'd look at somebody and you'd take the snapshot and your brain would pop out where those things were off.
Yeah.
And the only way that happens is through thousands of reps of being very specific with where you're looking. So you had to initially go,
I'm going to look at midline.
I'm going to look just at their midline, bunk, and look for it.
Exactly.
Then I'm going to look just at the shoulder. I'm going to look just at the elbow. And you have to be very piece by piece deliberate, because you know that those are the points of performance for any given movement. And that's how we develop seeing, right?
Yeah.
Is we initially are very intentional with it, and then eventually it gets to the point where you've seen so many thousands of reps that your eyes pan over a group of people and you go dun 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 dun, dun, and you're like, oh, that's awesome. But you can't start there. That's just not.
We talk about that all the time. Like, it starts with having a system, and the system is going to be, okay, the point of performance that I'm going to look for is going to be midline stabilization. That means I need to look here on the body, and I'm going to do that across the group. Then the next level of that is maybe you gain some experience and some time, and then maybe there's two things that you can kind of like, I'm going to look at midline, I'm going to look at shoulder, midline, shoulder, right? And there's a system that kind of goes in place, but it has to start with one at a time. And then, like you said, over time, things just kind of like rear their ugly head, if you will.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've always found human movement fascinating in general.
Yeah.
And just things that were a little different, because there's people who, like, most people move the same, and then quirks would step out and you turn your head and you're like, I wonder what's going on there. So I've always been fascinated by that.
Right.
And after seeing what I found interesting was watching, for the very first time of watching a coach who was really capable, how much they could do in one go, because it brought correcting to a whole new level. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, but that was Mike Bergner for me, where I watched Mike Bergner teach a class of like 15 people, and he had like 1 or 2 reps, and then he was like bang, 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 and I was like, what the hell? Like, how did you see that? And like it just jumped out at me like that's not possible. There's no way you saw all that. But your brain wants to make these patterns, and it wants to set these, like, this is your habit, and this is what's normal, and what falls outside. Like, that's a natural human tendency.
Yeah.
So as soon as you build those patterns, you can then go like you don't even need to think about it. It does happen, but it takes a lot of work initially.
Yeah, and so now it's like, I would love to be able to give listeners that are new to coaching a process and a plan on how do we get there. Like, that's ultimately what we want to get to, where I just look at people, there's a snapshot, and I can pretty much, my brain will be like, all right, it's midline, it's shoulders, it's elbows, it's this. But if we're brand new and we're just starting and we're teaching a specific warm-up and we're teaching any of the 9 foundational movements, or really any movement in general, where are we starting? What do you... Like, and this is going to go in line with what we're teaching, right? But where do we start our teaching and therefore start our seeing when we're teaching a movement for the first time?
Yeah, well, I think that the simplest thing is to start with, you teach one thing at a time, and then you look for that one thing. That is uncomplicated. So, for example, if I'm going to teach my group to keep their weight in their heels when they squat, I need to know where on the body I need to look. I said heels, and I'm going to go looking for heels. And selectively ignore everything else. And
even if we push back before that, before we're even having them keep their weight in their heels, we're going to start with static positions, right?
Yep.
And so what's your process as far as, like, clearly you're teaching static positions, and static positions are setups and finish for those that are unsure of that. Like, what's your process as far as, like, I'm going to teach this because I know I need to look at these things first with any movement?
So like the static positions are, number one is to put everybody in a position and put yourself in a position as a coach where you can see the most amount of people in the least amount of time, right? So that you can put, whether it be a circle or like, so the organization of the group set up in that position, and then get everybody to do what you need to do at the same time. So you have command of the space. Okay, I need you to put your feet like this, show it what it looks like, show the feet. My feet go underneath my shoulders. You guys do that, and then keep them there long enough, which doesn't need to be forever, but in the beginning, you got to give yourself that time
to make sure that it's right.
that it's right. And then you go and you check, and that if it's 2 people, that's quicker than if it's 15. But you still have to have a moment of like, relax, take a deep breath. Let's just look at feet, and they need to be where I told them to be.
And I'm 100% with you. I think starting with stance is absolutely the first place that you should start with every movement, outside of a pull-up or a hanging movement, right, where their stance isn't on the ground, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, starting with stance, what do you go to next?
Well, it depends on the move, but it's going to, like the body position is the next thing. So standing up tall, core tight, good posture, kind of balanced. So you can still see feet, but like balanced in their about midfoot, that type of stuff. And so again, it still goes into teaching that first. What am I looking for? I want you to look like this, where you're standing up tall, your belly is tight, and then you've kind of shifted weight so that you're balanced in the middle of your foot. You have a big footprint on the ground. And then you can, again, you have to put yourself in a position, where would you see that? You would move in a different direction and then go look at, well, where are they standing up tall? Are they slouched, or are they standing up? Are they overextending? And you might just look directly at midline positioning, right? Their torso and what's going on in their upper body, or the torso position. So that stance, then body position.
And then what comes after that in the
Grip.
setup? Depending on what
they're hanging on to, or if they're not.
Yeah.
Grip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do the hands go?
It's funny to me, maybe not funny, but interesting the fact that like so often like the stance, grip, and position, body position are like probably the 3 quote unquote simplest things. And we as coaches are like, all right, we're doing a shoulder press, feet underneath your hips, hands outside your shoulders, squeeze your belly. And we just assume because we said that our athletes are going to do that right. And to your point, you need to look specifically for those. And it's unbelievable how many athletes put their feet in the wrong place, grab the bar with the wrong grip. And with that, if we don't look and see the stance, grip, and body position, it's going to be really, really hard to do any of the dynamic stuff, right, or any of the points of performance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing is I think a lot of our coaching is there. Like no matter how long people have been going, a lot of our like seeing, correcting is with that stance and grip. Like, and it's the resetting in between reps, and it's the like, at each end of the movement and where you're holding them, and it's like it's a lot of static stuff, and that's very associated with stance, grip, and body position. And like there's so many cues to be had there, and there's so much interaction to be had there, and there's so much change to be made there over the person, and it's the easiest place to do it.
Yeah.
And it has the most impact.
Absolutely.
The most impact.
So yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I was like doing coaches development, and I often get asked, triage is a problem. How do I do this? And I'm like, stance, grip and body.
Yeah, dude.
Go there first, because I think that sometimes we might say it out of habit and teach it out of habit, but again, we're not checking.
Yep.
And then second to that, we're also not leaning into that. This goes into correcting more, but we're not leaning into that and saying, if I changed their stance, would it have a profound impact on the rest of the thing?
Totally.
And it's like, that's the easy button.
Dude.
Push that button.
But it's the easy button, but if you're not pressing it,
Yeah.
it makes everything else harder.
Yeah.
That's the weird part for me. It's like, why not just look at him, see something wrong, and be like, change your stance. And if it gets better, it gets better. If it doesn't, you always have the option of being like, cool,
Never mind.
Pretend
I didn't say that.
I've always found that fascinating where people go to something more complex faster.
Yep.
I think part of it is a lot of people get used to very reactionary coaching rather than like leading. And what they'll do is they'll just say, hey, show me a squat and I'll react to what you give me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like, yes, that can work. That can work just fine.
In a small group environment,
I was
like
say,
maybe
more
one-on-one,
more
maybe
one-on-one.
3 people, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, but even then, like there's no pattern being built there. There's
Right.
no process. There's no anything. But like when you do that, you're just limiting yourself to whatever you see versus like, let me set you up and let me just chip away one thing at a time. And that's that progression-based stuff where you're leading them, or even the ones where people set people up and they're like, everybody give me 5 reps. I'm gonna see what jumps out. And you're like, okay,
Nothing
well,
happens.
you're gonna see maybe a thing. Like you're
Right.
minimally effective at best. So this setup of stance and grip, like for seeing and correcting, this is essential. And I mean, it doesn't make sense to me why we go any deeper than that if that's not happening. But yeah.
Yeah, and so like I said, so many people assume it's right because I said it, or they've been doing it. Hey, Pat's been doing this for a while. He probably knows where his feet go.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or they think that the athlete knows. Well, yours is kind of narrow, but if that's how you squat, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm the expert,
Yeah.
or the coach is the expert. Just because you squat there and that's comfortable to you doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that there's number one, it doesn't need to be comfortable for it to be right. I love that. I always tell people that. I was like, it's not the same thing.
That saying's brutal.
But just brutal. And the other part is that I think that when we're seeing things, especially stance, grip, and body position, we need to kind of look through. This is what I try to tell coaches: is I want you to think of that like it's a blueprint. And yes, there are different people come in different shapes and sizes, and yes, there are limitations. But it's not my job as a coach to argue somebody's limitation about their flexibility. Like, I don't know that. That's not it. That what's important is for me to have a blueprint in my mind of where I need their hands to go, where I need their feet to go, and what I need their body to be like. And it's a blueprint, and we start to work towards that. And there will be exceptions.
Yep.
There's exceptions. But we have to first start with knowing what the blueprint is of where the stance, grip, and body position go for any given movement, and then make adjustments accordingly so that the movement at hand can be best expressed.
Yeah.
But
every athlete's unique, right? Every individual is unique. But that being said, there are so many patterns, and it's like, yeah, you're unique. You're great, Pat, but I've seen you before, not you, but somebody like you that squat and that feet is that stance is too narrow. I need you wider. Like, I know this.
And if you're newer and you don't have quite the confidence and you're dealing with a more experienced coach, we talked about this on one of our other podcasts, the being inquisitive and asking questions about it.
yeah.
That's a little narrow, like
Especially with experienced
totally. Why would
athletes, right?
do you feel more comfortable in that narrow position, or like
Why is that? Yeah.
why is that? What happens when you go wider? Like those kinds of things, even if you have the answer in your head, like you can lead someone to being like, it feels better here. And you're like, oh,
Or it's just,
interesting.
or when
Well,
they
it's just what they do.
Yeah, this is just how I've always squatted. Oh, cool.
Try it wider.
So that's not you don't have deliberate intention behind that. So let's do this. Cool. Well, with that narrow stance, your chest is a little bit more forward. If I widen you up, I think we'll get you a little bit more upright, which will be way more efficient. And I think we're going to, it'll be uncomfortable, but it's going to get better.
Are you a CrossFit coach who's feeling stuck in their development? You're not alone. Many coaches lack good guidance when it comes to how to develop as a coach. They either don't have strong examples they find themselves around, they may lack support from their gym owner, and they just feel unprepared going into their next credential. That's why we made the Knowledge Pro, to fill that gap. It's a mentorship program built for coaches like you. It uses the Knowledge Daily, our comprehensive video library, as well as extra content that we put directly into the Knowledge Pro on our live weekly calls twice a week to mentor you and get you to the next level of development. We've got progressions, we've got scales, we've got one-off tips and tricks, we've got full coached classes by level 4 coaches so you can see an example of what it means to do this job well. All of that will also be walked through each week on those live calls, so that you have a soundboard to bounce off of and a group of coaches looking to be better to help support you in your endeavors. Coaching isn't just knowing what to do, it's also knowing how to do it. And that takes 2 things. 1, an example, and 2, practice. Practice is on your end, you gotta go out there and do it. We can help provide that example and the support with the Knowledge Pro. If you wanna know more, click the link below and give the Knowledge Pro a shot. I look forward to seeing you on one of the next calls.
So yeah, stance, grip, and position, that's huge. Start there, stay there until that's perfect. Now, the next thing I'm curious about, so we've got static positions, which is the setup and the finish. The other phase of movement is dynamic. When people are moving, that's when it's more challenging, and that's when we need to know where we're looking and when we're looking there. The other thing that's really, really hard is figuring out what to prioritize. And so I'm going to ask you, if we think about the press series that we offer at the level 1, shoulder press, push jerk. Clearly the push jerk is the most complex And we need everything that we saw in the shoulder press and the push press, right? We need a straight bar path in the dynamic phase. We need an upright torso. We need the right timing of legs and arms. But when it comes to the push jerk, what is your priority and where are you looking? Do you have to see all of those things? Is that what you're focusing on first? Is I'm going to first watch the bar path, then I'm going to watch the torso, then I'm going to watch the timing? Or is there something specific with something like a push jerk where you're going to start?
Well, I think that the primary thing that is that tells where you need to go in terms of priority is loading. So if we're just talking about teaching the thing with a PVC pipe, it's just the movement all by itself, and it's not, and it's unloaded. Then in the jerk, the priority is going to be the things that are uniquely are the jerk, and those are going to be the extension of the hip and leg, and then the receiving position. Those are new to those movements, and kind of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of that movement. So that's what we want to stick with. And if it's loaded, that's a whole nother ball game. That changes priorities, right?
If it's loaded and it's dangerous, right? And risky, right?
Yeah, exactly, risky, because the loading adds an element of risk, and so there are things that could be prioritized differently. If it's but if we're just talking about the movement all by itself, and it's unloaded, I would, for sure, it's going to be that hip extension and the receiving position, because they're new. It's the new stuff.
I love that. And I think so many coaches still fall in the trap of like, well, I know the torso position's important. I'm going to focus there. And it's like, yes, it's absolutely important, but we really nail that and focus on that and try to learn that in the push press. And so if it's torso position or hip extension, stay disciplined and focus on the hip extension in the push jerk. Get that figured out. Yeah. And then know next time you're teaching the push press, you're going to be able to hammer the torso position. And I think it's hard for coaches to do because oftentimes it's some of those previous points of performance, bar path, torso position, that will jump out and catch somebody's eye, and so then their focus goes there and they're not disciplined enough to stay focused on the things that are new and unique.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also an interesting conversation to have when you're just teaching, if you're teaching a progression to the movement, like so if you're just teaching the push jerk, right? That I totally agree with you. Like you'd eliminate that torso angle as a thing. I personally don't even mention it until we get to the very end and then we're doing the full movement. And then I'll be like, cool.
Now that your hips are open, let's
talk about the torso angle. I think where it comes a little different is that maybe you're teaching a class and you're not diving as deep into the progression. I mean, you go through the progression, but if someone, as you're walking by them, is extreme in their torso drop, you could just mention it to them as a thing. What I would be hesitant to ever do would be to build that upright torso piece into the progression, which is what I see people do. And then they make it as one of the points.
Jump. Dip and jump.
Torso up against the wall. Now I want you to picture you're doing this, and it's like, well, I mean, I
just
might
made it
throw
more complex.
Totally. I might throw a one-liner as like, okay, you're jumping, like they're at the end of the progression. Hey, this next one, try to use that dip drive to jump and land.
Yes.
As a one-liner at the end of a progression. But if I'm moving in a class through a push jerk progression and there's somebody who's super extreme, I might lean by and be like, just try to be more upright when you
or knowing the root cause of it, right? If they're really jamming their hips back, hey, on this next jump, all I want you to think is knees forward in your jump.
Totally, yeah.
But I'm not going to do that at the expense of hip extension. And now get so caught up that I'm taking them against the wall and using a PVC pipe, and they're jumping and their knees are never straightening. It's like, yeah, that's important. I'm going to address it if I see it, but not lose focus on the important piece, which is hip extension. So many people they're not disciplined on knowing what the point of performance is that they're working on there, and they'll just chase whatever jumps out at them. Yeah. And that's being reactive rather than proactive, which is what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So static.
I was just going to say it's like the thing that comes up a lot that I see a lot, especially with newer coaches along the same vein, is teaching an overhead squat without having this PVC pipe over your head. Like, what's the main thing of the overhead squat? What's the uniquely different about the overhead squat compared to an air squat? It's the overhead position, and I even tell my coaches this at my gym. Is like, at all costs. This is not a hard rule, but I definitely lean into it hard. How often do we squat in an affiliate?
Never.
Damn near every day, right?
Okay,
like we go below parallel a lot.
Yeah.
Like we go below parallel often, yes?
Yeah.
But how often do we actually overhead squat specifically?
Less often.
Once a month,
yeah.
twice a month.
And so there are, right, is it valid to focus your seeing and your correcting and your eye and your practice and the practice for the athlete on the overhead position and compromise some other things. Maybe hold the thing over your head and don't go below parallel. I just need you to hold the thing over your head.
Yeah.
And let's practice that, right? So it's like, again, this becomes this, like, in order for us to see and correct things that are uniquely that movement specifically, then we need to, when we learn how to prioritize.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Such a good point there on, we focus on this thing because this movement in general is not going to pop up all the time, but everything before it more than likely will.
Yeah.
And we're going to have opportunities to work on that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about scene, we've talked static, we've talked dynamic, maintaining the priority of the unique specific point of performance for that movement. Now let's talk correcting. 3 correcting styles. What are they?
Tactile, visual, verbal.
Useful, not useful, garbage.
Which one is the most useful and will we use the most often?
Tactile, baby. Woo! Get up in
Hit
that.
my hand. Hit my hand.
Hit my hand. Hit my
Get
hand
grabby,
again.
get handsy. Verbal for sure.
We are being sarcastic in case that didn't come across on audio. Verbal.
So tell me about verbal cues. Because I think here's what I run into and what I see, and I remember I experienced this as a coach. I learn all this stuff. I know all this stuff. I love all this stuff. I want to explain all this stuff. Is that potentially a good verbal cue?
No, it's not. That's because it's too much information, too fast, and I think that general rules around verbal cues is give a body part that is out of position a direction to go.
What about if you're doing something wrong? You need to know why I'm cueing you, so I'm going to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Do you need to know that?
Well, I like to know that.
That's cute. We talk about it later.
I love it. Right, then that's it. And it's like, we as the coach, I get that as pushback. I'm like, hey, you don't need to tell them that they're not extending their hips. That's implied when I say,
do this.
Squeeze your butt harder. And if it's not, and they ask me questions after class, or they ask me in between sessions, hey, you kept telling me to squeeze my butt. Why is that? Now I can tell them. Now I can be like, hey, you weren't extending your hips. You're not going to be as powerful, X, Y, and Z. Like, you got an hour? Let's go up to my office. I'd love to tell you everything you need to know about this stuff, but most people don't care.
Yeah.
We as coaches, we care, and so we want to know why.
I think some people's arguments is like, I wanted to know, and I'm like, yeah, you're a coach now.
Exactly.
That's why.
That's my point.
That's why you wanted
You
to know.
are
Like,
here as a coach.
You were really into it, and so you needed that more education. But I would say there's a time and place, but it's not in the main teaching of most things. Like the time and place falls outside that when you're seeing the inquisitive, or even like one movement a day, you give a little bit of an elaboration. But for the vast majority, they don't need to know anything. I think too, thinking about cueing is like, what do I need to do to have the outcome that I want? Has nothing to do with why they're doing it. Essentially, you just need to be like, so if let's take your first example where you see them for the beginning of the day and their shoulders are hunched and they're sad and they're down. You don't need to come up to them and explain to them, hey, I'm noticing that your shoulders are hunched and you're sad and you're down and you're looking a little imploded.
Your posture, you look like trash.
I
You look
think
like
what's going on
trash.
is it might be your sleep and the blah, blah, blah. You need to come in and be like, this person needs to be uplifted. So what do? You don't fucking tell them all about the whole thing. You just go, hey, you want to hear a funny knock-knock joke? And you give them a joke because that's going to change what they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you internalize what, like, the entire scenario, and then you just give them something that'll make them different than they currently are.
Yes.
And it's as simple as, like, and you can use this in a squat or a movement, or somebody standing there where it's like, hey, what is that written on your shirt? And now all of a sudden they want to show it to you, and then it's like, oh, cool. I've just changed things. Oh, that's a good posture. Why don't you stand there like that when we're doing this?
Totally.
Whatever that is, right?
Yeah. And I think where a lot of coaches, when they're learning, get hung up is they really like to articulate what they're seeing because it helps them reinforce it. So they're like, I'm really noticing that you're da-da-da-da and say the whole thing.
Yep.
Try to do that internally. Like that noticing of what you're seeing, you do that inside, and then you go, okay, now I'm seeing that. Then you go, okay, how can I not see that?
Yeah.
And what could I say to make it so they don't see it, that I don't see it anymore? And what would they do? Can I just tell them to do that thing?
Yeah.
And it's right back to body part and direction.
Yeah. Yep.
Knees out, heels down, chest up,
Use
hips
a name
lower.
every now and again.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
throw a name in there. That can be I always challenge people when I'm teaching level 2s and we're doing like the scene and correcting drill. It's like, I want it 3 words or less.
Yeah.
All right, 4th word can be their name. That's fine. There's some faults where I might let you say 5 words, but I don't know that I've ever come across a fault that needs more than 5 names. or 5 names,
Five-
5
for
words.
sure.
Jim, Frank,
Yeah.
Todd.
Pat, knees out.
Did you get it?
Did you get it?
Was it me you were talking to? I didn't know.
I think one of the important things that you just said there, that you kind of were walking through the process, is that the coaches sometimes get so eager to say something and do something that they're not giving themselves the time that a moment, like we talked about at the beginning, where there's an internal process that happens. You're watching something, you identified something in your head. Instead of saying the thing out loud, hey, I'm seeing this, or you keep letting your chest drop, give yourself a moment and just, what's the thing what does it need to do? Your chest needs to go up. Okay, good. Just tell them that.
Yeah.
Lift your chest up. And so, I think that there is an opportunity in terms of, you were asking earlier about what's the system. Take a breath, take a moment. It doesn't need to be lightning fast in the beginning.
Right, it won't be.
But it'll get there eventually.
Yep.
If you follow a process and you give yourself the time to do it in the order and follow the process.
Now, verbal is body part direction.
Yep.
3 words or less. What's visual? What are we doing there?
It looks like this, and I need it to look like this.
Do you always show the full movement when
No.
you're given a visual?
Not necessarily.
When is that useful? Environment in a class. I don't think I articulated that well. Like, in what part of class, what time of class, where do you, relationship to athletes?
Showing the full movement versus just a quick
Just
thing?
a visual cue in general.
Oh, visual cue. I think that those are most effective depending on where you are, number one. So if you're not going to give a visual cue to Pat that's over there on the other side of the gym,
Hey,
and
Pat,
I'm going to
turn and look at me.
Turn and look, and I'm going to run over there and do that. That's
Yep.
ineffective. But if I'm standing right next to you and I'm in the right place at the right time, and we're probably going to be in the specific warm up, I'm going to be like, yo, your elbows look like this. I need them to look like this in the front rack. Then that would be the right thing, because I'm in a position that allows for that to be effective. And I'm going to put myself directly in front of you, so you don't have to rearrange your body and your barbell and all of the things. I'm just going to put myself in a position that is quick, easy for you to see. And and less words is better, because we want to have the intent there is for the athlete that is learning needs to be able to look at my hands. This is what yours look like. This is what I need them to look like. And they're looking at you as opposed to trying to listen to you.
And there's a distinct difference between the
And
positions,
it's
right?
it's obvious.
And so, we've got to be standing in the right position, meaning we're in front of them. I think that, obviously, in a specific warm-up, that's great. I find that, if I've got a big class and somebody's in the way back and they're not going to be able to hear me, or I'm going to have to yell ridiculously, then it's just like, hey, Pat, cool, got him.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
workouts happening, heart rate's at 180, music's cranking.
Yeah.
You're not going to hear me. I'm going to try to get your attention. A lot of times, step in front of you, make eye contact, and then it's like, hey, sweet, got it, boom, we move on.
Yeah, I think the 2 patterns are an over-exaggerated point, go, or a, you're doing this, I want you to do this.
Yeah.
One's more of a teaching one. Another one's more of just it's big and over the top, and you're just showing them. I think you can always incorporate body movements into even in your teaching style.
Yep.
So we're outside of, seeing and correcting, just, guys, we're going to push our elbows up as we do this, and people are like, oh, that's what elbows
Cool, I
up
can
like.
see that. Yeah.
It can always reinforce.
Yeah. And to your point, what you were just talking about with most of what you guys just said, hey, knees, when you're, hey, Pat, and you do one of those from across the room, the reason that works is because of what has happened previously.
For sure.
In the class. It's not, you're not just, Pat should know when you point at the elbow and you tell he knows exactly what's happening, because it's something has already been corrected or communicated about what the elbow is supposed to do in this movement.
Yeah, you wouldn't teach it that way.
No.
You wouldn't be
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
all right, everybody, we're going to do a front squat.
Well, and here's the other thing with the teaching, and it kind of goes back to when we're given a visual cue, we want to exaggerate what they're doing wrong and show them what they're doing right. But that should not be a teaching strategy, and I see that a lot of times.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, with your front rack, what I want is your elbows up. So what I don't want to see is this.
Yeah.
It's like we don't want to teach what not to do.
Yeah.
We fix it if it's going wrong, but we don't teach by
wrong.
visually showing the wrong thing, because a lot of people are kind of checked out. They're just watching, and if they see you do this, and they're like, okay, elbows down, I guess that's it. there's going to be people that mimic that. You might laugh and be like, will never happen. Try it.
Save that for the
Show
teaching
something and try it. Now, last one, tactile cues. How do we do that?
I give the hand grabby. You grab as much meat on a body as you can. Just
find where there's the most meat.
And you want it to be bare skin, probably.
Yeah.
I want you to push your knees out, salmon up the stream. Yeah.
Jeez.
No? All right.
I think that the general rules are put yourself in a position that, if number one, I think that with tactile cues, that a lot of times comes from the coach's comfort level across the board. Like if you're if it feels uncomfortable for you as the coach, then it probably is.
Uncomfortable.
It probably
for them
is.
too.
So just don't. And second to that, so there is some level of comfort.
Yeah,
I'll take I don't
that.
know that word.
Yeah, that's good.
Comfortosaurus.
Yeah. And the other thing is have your athlete work towards or away from targets.
Yeah.
Right.
Towards or away from targets.
Towards or away from so that they're doing work and they're moving their body in the right position and that you're asking for them to do, or as opposed to you grabbing an elbow and being like up like this.
Yeah,
That's
awkward. It's uncomfortable.
awkward.
Someone's going to lose balance, something like that. And you're also creating, by giving them a target, the athlete's creating that like mind-body connection, the
that
kinesthetic
neurological,
awareness to get there. Now, how often do you use tactile cues? Realistically, how often do you use them?
Gosh, I think that's probably the least amount in a class
Would you
out of the three.
Would you say every class you coach there is one?
Yeah, probably.
Pat, you?
Nope.
Yeah, I don't.
I think there is a reality to the fact that women can touch people more than men can. Just to put it out there, I think it's a more socially accepted thing for a female coach to be slightly more handsy. And I've seen all
Have you had a class with Jason Ackerman?
Yeah, yes. Well, that's to our point.
But that's to
Females
our point.
Are way more.
That does nothing but prove what I'm saying is
yes.
correct. It's like 90% of people
Men
are like,
can't. We'll just put it that way. Men can't do it as much, and that's why that works.
I would also say, I think for me, it's not a go-to. A lot of the gyms I've worked at have had such large classes that it doesn't fit. Like very rarely is it something that I can't solve with verbal or visual.
Same.
And like that's the only time I would go there is like, okay, I need to catch you because you're falling over, or I need to like provide some sort of a block here that's going to.
Yeah, and clearly you're not getting it. It's probably something complex, and you are a very like somebody
Unique.
that learns by doing it, and it's less. That might be in like a loading session of a lifting day where it's like, hey, I want you to do this random one-off drill with me on the side while everybody else is kind of doing something.
Yeah.
Because often, like, if somebody has a barbell in their hand, outside of like, hey, lift your hips up in a deadlift setup or push your knees out a little bit more in the squat, there's not much that I'm going to do with a tactile cue in class. So I'm same as you, Pat, where it's like, definitely doesn't happen every single class, rarely probably happens at all. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that I've worked so much at my verbal and visual cues that they're pretty short, they're pretty specific, and I've been fortunate enough to teach enough movement to where I've kind of got some of the cues down that work pretty darn well most of the time.
Yeah.
And it's only when I'm pulling new tricks out of the hat that I have to try something new because all of my go-to things aren't working.
Yeah, and that's different for me because I was a yoga instructor for a long time, and there's a lot of hands-on stuff. So that and I mean, female or not female, doesn't matter. Like that comes with the repertoire that is in my coach's toolbox, right? Like I just have those tools in my toolbox, and so it comes more naturally for me to do that, and that's okay. It just is. That's part of me as a coach.
I've gotten into good fights with people about tactile cueing being a useful thing, like solid battles where I'm like, nah, and they're like, yep. I'm like, and we just, I think I think if it works for you, do it.
Right. I think
for sure.
it's that.
That's the nature of all things.
Anything, yeah. I don't know that I can battle and be like, Brentnie, well, I don't care about your yoga background. You shouldn't do this. That's not realistic.
Not what I was saying. Those were the battles. I was just saying. It was more the conversation was around like, hey, that's not where I would go or need to go, and they're like, in order for you to get better, you need to go there. I'm like,
not necessarily.
Maybe, not necessarily.
Yeah,
we got to define better first and foremost. But no, I think it's if I were to categorize all the tactile cues that I would ever do, hand on the outside of the knee for knees out.
Yep.
I think. What would be another one?
Elbows. I'll give them a elbow target.
Yep.
I'll do that.
Occasional elbow target. Yep. I would say bring the bar back to my hand if someone's really not understanding PVC pipe overhead or where it needs to be. So like kind of adjusting
Yeah,
their
or
position.
like a pressure on an overhead squat. Yeah.
Pressure to engage shoulder. But other than that, like nothing.
And those are so quick.
Yeah,
It's
they're so
not
quick.
like it's not
Yeah.
dramatic. It's just a little like right here.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
it.
I do a slap on the belly for midline engagement, but I only do it to dudes
It's cute.
When they're wearing their cutoff tanks.
when they wear cutoff tanks. But
Yep.
yeah, I
Skin on
actually do
skin.
that an often. That's probably my most used tactile cue is I'll come by and go, pat, and like just a full on pa 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 pa. Like
That's completely inappropriate, so it sounds about right.
totally, and that's the one.
Yeah.
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 All right. So, scene, you start static, stance, grip, body position. That is going to clean up most things that you need to do.
Yep.
Start there, stay there, hammer that thing,
Revisit there.
revisit there between every rep, every break.
Yes.
Dynamic stuff. Start with the things that are new and unique with the movement that you're teaching. Stay disciplined enough to stay focused on that, even if you catch something else weird going on somewhere else. Get in a position to where you can see, have a system to get around the group. Verbal cues, short, specific, and actionable.
Body
3
part,
words or less.
direction.
Body part and direction.
Yep.
Visual. When you're in the right position, you're doing this. I want you doing this. And then tactile, I guess never.
Never.
Yeah,
Just
there we
never.
go.
Just don't,
Nailed it.
don't touch
That's
people.
it.
Yeah. Into
Um,
it. I'm glad
love
you
it.
guys took that away from this.
Yeah.
All
That was
right.
great. Thanks, Brentnie.
Thank you.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Behind the Knowledge. Now, if you want help developing your coaching and to learn from us directly, check out the Knowledge Pro. There we host live calls with our coaches every week where we discuss content together and work on skills to improve our on-the-floor coaching ability. To learn more, you can head over to besthouroftheirday.com/the-knowledge. And if you found this content helpful, we're going to be releasing new episodes every week, so subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.